November 12th, 1965, 11:34 p.m. backstage at a London venue. Bob Dylan was standing near a makeshift bar, drink in hand, when a young musician walked directly up to him and said the words that would change both their lives. "I want to challenge you, right here, right now." The room went silent. Maybe 20 people backstage, musicians, journalists, crew members. Dylan looked at this kid, couldn't have been more than 22, standing there with his guitar case and an expression that mixed desperation with arrogance. "Challenge me to what?" Dylan asked, voice flat, those dark sunglasses hiding whatever he was thinking. "Guitar. Let's see who's actually better." Someone laughed nervously. Someone whispered, "Oh God." Dylan didn't move, just stood there holding his drink. Then Dylan did something nobody expected. He set his drink down on the table, slowly, deliberately, the glass making a soft sound that somehow felt louder than it should have been. "All right," Dylan said quietly. "Let's play." The young musician felt his stomach drop. He'd expected Dylan to laugh it off, to walk away. He hadn't expected Dylan to actually accept. Have you ever gotten exactly what you asked for and immediately regretted it? That's where this young musician was at 11:35 p.m. on November 12th, 1965. To understand why this guitarist thought he could challenge Bob Dylan, you need to understand where he'd come from. He'd been playing since he was 13. Natural talent. The kind that made older musicians shake their heads in disbelief. By 16, he was the best guitarist in his hometown. By 19, the best in his city. Every step had been marked by victory. School talent shows, local competitions, battle of the bands. He'd won everything, beat everyone. Success had built a fortress around his ego. By late 1965, he'd moved to London, chasing the dream. Small record deal pending, some buzz in the folk scene, enough attention to make him believe he was on the verge of something big. But everywhere he went, he heard the same name, Bob Dylan. Dylan this, Dylan that. It made him furious, because he'd studied Dylan's guitar playing, analyzed his technique, and he knew, absolutely knew, that technically he could play better. Dylan's fingerpicking was good, but not exceptional. His chord progressions were interesting, but not complex. His technique was solid, but not virtuosic. So why did everyone treat Dylan like he was untouchable? The young musician convinced himself it was marketing. Hype, people following trends. He'd been building toward this confrontation for months, waiting for the right moment. That opportunity came when a friend got him backstage access. Just be cool, his friend had warned. But being cool wasn't what this young musician had in mind. He'd brought his guitar, practiced for weeks. He was going to prove that Bob Dylan wasn't as good as everyone claimed. He was going to show the world that technical skill mattered more than reputation. He was about to learn how wrong he was about everything. The backstage area transformed instantly. People moved, creating space, forming a circle. Someone found a second chair, placed it across from where Dylan stood. The young musician sat down, pulled out his guitar, a beautiful instrument that had cost him more than anything. His hands were shaking slightly. Dylan picked up his own guitar, sat down across from the challenger, still wearing those sunglasses. A journalist pulled out a notebook. This was going to be a story. "You want to go first?" Dylan asked, voice neutral. "Or should I?" "I'll go first," the young musician said. Dylan gestured. "Go ahead." The young musician had chosen his song carefully. An original composition he'd been perfecting for months. Complex fingerpicking, jazz-influenced chord progressions. Beautiful melody. Everything designed to prove he was a serious musician. He took a breath and began to play. What came out was flawless. His fingers moved with machine-like precision. The finger-picking pattern was intricate and perfectly executed. The chord changes were smooth. The melody crystalline. Every note exactly where it should be. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then applause, genuine appreciation. Someone said, "That was impressive." The young musician felt relief. He'd done it, played perfectly. He looked at Dylan, waiting for acknowledgement. Dylan nodded slowly. "You're very good. Technically excellent." "Your turn," the young musician said, and then Bob Dylan began to play. What Dylan played wasn't technically complex. The finger picking was simple. The chord progression basic, the melody almost primitive. But something happened when Dylan played that the young musician's perfect performance had completely lacked. The room changed. Dylan wasn't just playing notes. He was communicating something, some truth about loneliness or loss or being completely out of place in a world that demanded you fit in. His voice cracked in places, hit notes that were slightly off. Didn't matter. The imperfection made it more real. When Dylan sang, it felt like he was pulling something raw and honest from deep inside himself and laying it bare. The young musician felt something cold settling in his stomach. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd expected technical mastery, expected to compare skill against skill. But Dylan wasn't playing skill. Dylan was playing truth. When the song ended, the silence was different, deeper, more reverent, like 20 people had witnessed something sacred. Then someone started crying, actually crying from a 3-minute song in a backstage room. The applause was quieter than what the young musician had received, but heavier, more meaningful. The young musician sat there knowing he'd lost, not because Dylan played better technically, but because Dylan had played something that actually mattered. All those hours of practice, all that technical precision, meaningless, because he'd been so focused on how to play that he'd forgotten why to play. Dylan set his guitar down, picked up his drink, like he'd just finished a casual warm-up instead of something that had fundamentally changed the room. "You want to go again?" Dylan asked. No challenge in his voice. The young musician shook his head. "No, I'm good." The room slowly came back to life, the moment dissolving, but the young musician couldn't move, just sat there holding his expensive guitar. A woman moved closer, sat on the floor next to his chair. "Don't feel bad," she said quietly. "We've all been there. That moment when you realize Bob isn't just talented, he's something else entirely." "How do you compete with that?" the young musician asked. "You don't. You figure out what you need to say, not what you can play, what you need to say." People were leaving. The young musician started to pack up. Ready to escape. That's when Dylan walked over. "You got a minute?" Dylan asked. "Let's talk. Somewhere private." The young musician nodded. Dylan led him to a small room off the main area. Closed the door, the sounds of London at midnight filtering through a window. And Bob Dylan was about to teach this young musician a lesson that would change the entire trajectory of his life. Dylan sat on the edge of a table, gestured for the young musician to take the chair. "You're technically very good," Dylan said. "Better than me in a lot of ways. Cleaner, more precise. But you're playing for the wrong reasons," Dylan continued. "I could hear it in every note. You were trying to prove something. Show off your skill." The words hit hard, because they were accurate. "I wanted to show people I was good," the young musician said. "Why?" "Because everyone keeps saying you're the best. And I know I can play better technically." Dylan pulled out a cigarette, lit it. "That's your whole problem. You're trying to compete with me, which means you're letting me define what you do. How do I stop?" "You stop caring what I think, what anyone thinks. You figure out what you actually need to express, and you express it, even if it's messy." The young musician looked down at his hands. "You know what the difference was tonight? You played a demonstration. I played confession. You showed technique. I showed truth. And truth is always more powerful than technique. But you have technique too. Sure, but technique is just the hammer. It's not the house. You're so in love with your hammer that you forgot to build anything." Dylan walked to the window, looked out at London. "You want to know the real challenge?" Dylan asked. The young musician nodded. "It's not playing better than anyone else. The real challenge is finding something true inside yourself and having the guts to share it, even when it's ugly, even when it's imperfect." "What if what I have to say isn't good enough?" "Then it's not good enough, but at least it'll be yours. At least it'll be real." Dylan turned. "Right now you're trying to speak someone else's language. You're performing instead of expressing." "How do I know the difference?" "When you're performing, you're thinking about the audience, about how you look. When you're expressing, you forget the audience exists. You're just trying to get something out that needs to come out. The young musician felt tears building, not from sadness, from relief. He'd been so focused on being better than everyone else that he'd forgotten to be himself. I came here tonight to prove I was better than you. I know, and I've done the same thing. That's part of learning. Did you lose? Every time until I figured out I was playing the wrong game entirely. Dylan sat back down. You've got time. Time to figure out who you are, what you actually want to say. The record label keeps telling me I need to sound more commercial. Then they don't understand what you're for. Find people who want what you actually have to offer. They talked for another hour about music, about ego, about the difference between skill and artistry. The young musician asked questions he'd been too proud to ask before, about writer's block, about criticism, about dealing with pressure. Dylan answered honestly, not like a legend talking to a nobody, like one musician talking to another. I've been so angry, the young musician said. Angry at you for being successful, angry at myself, angry at everyone who didn't recognize my talent. Anger's useful sometimes, but only if you're angry about something that matters, not just angry that you're not famous enough. How do I let it go? You write about it, play about it, get it out, or you just decide it's not serving you and walk away from it. The young musician felt some tight knot of resentment slowly beginning to unravel. Thank you for not just destroying me and walking away. Why would I do that? You're talented. You just need to stop trying to be me and start being you. I don't know who that is yet. Good. That means you haven't locked yourself into something false. They stood. Dylan opened the door. The backstage area had mostly cleared. You going to keep playing? Dylan asked. Yeah, but different. I think I need to start over. That's the right answer. The young musician left the venue around 2 a.m. guitar on his back. Mine completely different. He didn't go home. Walk through London, through mostly empty streets. He thought about what Dylan had said, about truth, about finding your voice. When he got back to his apartment at sunrise, he sat down with his guitar. But instead of practicing technique, he just started playing. No plan. Just playing whatever came out. What emerged was messy, imperfect, but it felt more honest than anything he'd played in years. Over the next 6 months, his approach to music changed completely. He stopped trying to impress people, started trying to be emotionally honest. His playing got worse in some ways, less precise, but it got better in the ways that actually mattered. More authentic, more true. The record deal fell through. The label wanted commercial potential. What he was creating was too raw, too honest. It hurt, but not as much as expected, because he was finally creating something that mattered to him. He never told anyone about that night with Dylan. It felt too personal, too important. Years later, when he'd built a modest but sustainable career, someone asked what had changed. I challenged someone once, he said, and I lost before I played a single note. But what I learned from losing was worth more than any victory. This story doesn't have a Hollywood ending. The young musician didn't become famous, didn't sell millions of records, but he became himself, and that mattered more. He spent the next 40 years making music that touched people, not millions, but the people it touched deeply. He taught guitar, passed on what Dylan had taught him. When students came focused only on technique, he'd tell them about the night he challenged Bob Dylan. Being the best doesn't matter, he'd say. Being honest does. His students learned. The lesson spread. One person choosing authenticity over ego, teaching others, those others teaching more. Ripples across decades. The story never became famous, never appeared in biographies, never made it into history books. Because it wasn't about Bob Dylan's legend. It was about a lesson, a private moment between two musicians. And what that moment teaches us is more important than who was involved. It teaches us that skill without purpose is just noise, that technical perfection without emotional truth is empty, that competition keeps us from finding our own voice. It teaches us that the greatest artists aren't the ones with the most technical ability. They're the ones brave enough to be vulnerable, honest enough to be real. The young musician is in his 80s now, still playing, still teaching, still grateful for the night someone showed him what music was actually for. He never saw Dylan again. That one conversation was enough, a gift that kept giving for half a century. Sometimes people ask if he regrets challenging Dylan that night. No, he always says. Best thing I ever did, because I lost that challenge but won something much more important. I won the freedom to be myself. That's the real story of November 12th, 1965. Not a competition, a lesson, not about who played better guitar, about what guitar playing is actually for. A young musician challenged Bob Dylan to prove he was better, and Dylan responded by teaching him that better was the wrong question entirely. The right question wasn't, am I better than you? The right question was, am I being honest with myself? And that question, that shift from comparison to authenticity, changed everything. That's what happened when a young musician challenged Dylan backstage in 1965. Dylan put down his drink, accepted the challenge, and taught a lesson that transcended music entirely. A lesson about being human, about finding your voice, about having the courage to stop performing and start expressing. That lesson is still being taught, still spreading, still changing lives. Because the best response to a challenge isn't defeating someone, it's teaching them that they were asking the wrong question.